Uh, and we'll get started. So we'll have, like usual, we'll have our some presentation, and we'll have an opportunity for some discussion. So take it away, Joel.
Okay, good morning. Great. Thanks for having me, Troy. My name is Joel. As you said, I'm from Rewiring America, which is a nonprofit that's focused on essentially on household electrification, but also wider electrification across the economy. And let's see. Hang on. Oh, there we go. So I just want to start with this quote that I found from somebody from who works at the California Energy Commission. And he says, a solution to the climate crisis is finally surfacing. And I hope everybody hears this. It's basically one, clean your electric grid to be all renewable. Two, electrify vehicles as the number one emitters in the nation. And three, drastically reduce fossil fuel use in homes and buildings. And I like that because one, it's a pretty hopeful message that is not it's not widely known yet. And two, it distills it down into these three steps. The first step is sort of happening slowly. The grid is slowly greening. And two, EVs are starting to take off in the market. But three is less well known. And in some ways, it's the hardest one because it requires everybody to decide individually for their own household that they need to get rid of their fossil fuel appliances. And, I met Troy from somebody in Denver as I was looking for people who are working with cities to try and do that work of reducing fossil fuel use in buildings. There's not a ton of people doing it yet, and there's not a ton of towns. There's interest, but there's not a lot of motion on it. And um, we're Rewiring America is sort of founded on the principle of trying to get everybody going on this task. And I'll just show this graph. This came out a couple of days ago from the IEA. That's like the International Energy Administration. And it shows 1.5 degrees Celsius is our global warming target. It shows this growth in installed heat pumps globally, including those orange bars on the right, show where we need to be in 2025 and 2030 and beyond. It doesn't show beyond, but in order to try and reduce our energy use so that we can hit reduce our energy use and reduce our emissions so that we can hit that 1.5 degree target. And, we're sort of on the path, but it's a very distributed problem where everybody needs to do it for their own home and they need to find the money to do it. So we'll talk more about that. So the story of how I came to be part of Rewiring America, last January, Saul Griffith, shown here, who was one of the co-founders of Rewiring America in 2020, the group started in part to advise presidential candidates around energy policy. And he was writing a book which came out last October. But when I talked to him in January, he's like, my book's coming out in October. My book talks about why we should electrify everything. And we could really use a guide on how to electrify everything for the people who want to get going. And so he suggested I work on that. So I did. And for a good chunk of last year, I researched and put together this book. It's a guide on, it's a free guide. You can download it on the link below. And maybe someone can drop it in the chat or we can email it out later. But it's at rewiringamerica.org. And it's these 10 steps on how to get fossil fuels out of your home. And, I didn't have this explicit in the book, but you could think of it as, advice for how to make a plan to get rid of all your fossil fuel appliances, and then how to be a good client to the contractors who are going to come and do the work in your house. So it's got questions for contractors. It's got background information for what you need to know in order to know what the contractor is suggesting. So it's sort of a best practices manual on those two fronts. Make a plan, be a good client. And in the book, we put together this chart that sort of summarizes what each of these 10 things are in terms of how long they last and how much they might cost to get installed. But it also has this page of do now suggestions, which are the things you could do immediately to get going on each of these 10 things. And it's not you have 20 years basically. If you want, you can just wait until your fossil fuel appliances stop working and replace them one by one. But the important thing is to know what you're going to replace it with, so you don't get stuck in an emergency situation where your water heater goes out and you just want another water heater, and the contractor that you call doesn't have a heat pump water heater on the truck, and you don't have an electrician available to do the electric install. And so you just get another fossil fuel water heater, and that lasts another 15 years. We're trying to help people avoid that. So the do now stuff is, are suggestions for how you can start to make a plan and how you can prevent painting yourself into a corner on all the different facets. Think of it kind of like a puzzle, and you need to plan ahead so that the puzzle pieces all fit together, both in terms of your electrical panel, in terms of your energy, electricity budget for your house, and in terms of who you're going to call to actually get the work done. And Portland has done a good job of trying to help set that up for initial customers with the Electrify Everything program that just launched. Okay, I'll just talk about a few other things that are not our guide. There's this group called Redwood Energy, and they have a free guide as well for doing all electric retrofits of your house, which is very nice. And the second half of that, it has a bunch of case studies and stuff. The second half does a nice job of laying out what some of your appliance choices are for the different things that you need to replace. So that's worth getting. And then there's also a talk by this group in Menlo Park, California, where they take very seriously the idea of, if you have a 100 amp electrical panel, that's good enough for many people to fully electrify. And I'll talk more about this, but the electrical panel can be an obstacle to electrifying. They have some suggestions for how to try and avoid, again, painting yourself into a corner. I also, if you guys are interested in doing it as a group, I know Electrify Everything program has hired a contractor to help you. But if in addition to that, people were interested in banding together to try and get discounts on appliances, I found, while working on the talk for Denver, I found this helpful guide from their city government on how to get group discounts. And I just appeared on a panel that was earlier this week. It was pretty nice collection of people. There was a realtor, there were some other people who work on electrification. So that's available on Facebook with the link below as well. Okay, so I'm not going to go into the details of why you should electrify. This is sort of a summary of what's in the book, but I just want to point out that first one on the list is that you're going to have to replace most of your stuff in the next 5 to 20 years anyway, because that's about how long these things last. Whether it's your furnace or your car or your EV, there are outliers, obviously, the person with the 50-year-old car with 500,000 miles on it. But in general, these things break down and then you have to replace them, and you should consider going electric on all of them. But then as far as going rewiring as a community, which is something that our organization is starting to look at, the benefits are that not everybody has to do it individually. And again, the Electrify Everything program, I read a little bit about it, and Troy could probably give his own coffee and climate talk about that program. But the idea is that there are a lot of choices that you have to make in getting rid of all your fossil fuel appliances. And I understand a lot of people don't necessarily like to make lots of decisions. So if you could get into a group of people, then maybe you can share some of the research, and you can just makes all of the individual obstacles, not obstacles, but all the friction points maybe get easier if you don't have to make all the decisions. And I think the Electrify Everything program is going to try and smooth some of that out with the sole contractor. So I have down there, great job for Portland, Maine by setting this program up. Another idea, this came up from talking to the people from Menlo Park. They were like, some things like heat pump water heaters, the 240 volt 15 amp version is a less common version, and forthcoming are these 120 volt ones that'll just plug into a regular wall outlet. It could be that stockpiling some of those so that they're available for your community would make the replacement pretty easy, so that it's less dependent on each person calling a single contractor and hoping they have it in stock. Instead, it would just be having a few of them available and then replacing them as they get installed in different people's houses. Okay, so first thing in the book, I'm going to sort of go through a couple of the chapters of the book in a little more detail, and then the rest of the chapters quickly. But the first thing in the book is to purchase renewable energy. So just out of curiosity, does anybody know what percentage of your power electricity supply is renewable and 1% fossil?
I do.
Okay, what do you got?
New England is about, well, 60% natural gas. Maine is about 80% renewable, but we purchase from the grid. So I'm going to go with it's less than 60, but less than 35% renewable in New England.
Less than 35%. So what do we got here? It's about 50-50, apparently, according to, this is the EPA's power profiler, and this is for the whole New England region. And their fuel mix, you're about 50-50 if you include nuclear. So that's pretty good.
Nuclear is renewable.
Nuclear is, instead of renewable, I should write emissions free.
Non-carbon.
Non-carbon emitting. That's right. So that's pretty good. It's getting better, but something that you guys can do to encourage that, I actually didn't check, but if there is on your utility bill a way for you to transfer over to a fully renewable plan option, is there? Who's your power provider?
It's
we have Central Maine Power. Oh, go ahead.
So they're
Jen.
not our power provider. They
Right.
are a
the
delivery
distributor.
company.
Yeah.
There is a choice where you can buy Maine Green Power RECs, but the better way to go is that there are a lot of community solar projects popping up right now. We also have, Joel, we also have a renewable portfolio standard in Maine that commits the state to getting to 80% renewable by 2030 and 100% by 2050.
Okay, great.
There's
awesome.
There's also net energy billing where individuals can select a solar provider or wind provider and have essentially 100% renewable.
Awesome. Well, that's all great. And essentially, I don't know if this information is consolidated anywhere, if there's a guide to buying renewable power, but you see down here on the bottom here, this guy Nate Adams, who is a big Electrify Everything guy and has done a lot of good work. He recommends he did this for, he was living in Ohio. I think now he's in West Virginia, but for Ohio, he sort of consolidated how to switch your bill to the renewable plan. And what you guys are telling me is great. If there's a bunch of community solar projects, and there's also the ability to buy RECs, which are basically it's a financialized version of what comes off of your, it's a way of separating the solar panel from the solar energy that it produces, that you could purchase. If there are ways for people, for homeowners or individuals to do it, and you can consolidate that into a page where, a web page or something with screenshots that's like, hey, here's what's available, and you encourage people to do that, you might be able to push things further sooner. And that's, so community solar, community wind, the utility, you said does or doesn't provide a renewable option. Does that make sense? Is there a way out here in California you can call up and be like, hey, I want to switch from the standard plan to the all renewable plan? Does that exist for Central Maine?
We can do it. Yeah, we can buy from the provider that we choose.
Oh yeah. Okay. So the suggestion is sort of publicizing that and getting more people to do that could help move Maine even further, or New England in general, further towards fully renewable quicker than if everybody just sort of waits for it to happen through the renewable portfolio standard, et cetera. And it could be that the screenshotted web page reference is something that you could point something to people to as part of Electrify Everything, as one suggestion. The next thing is your electrical service. So if you think of your electrical panel as sort of the heart of your electrification project, and you think about the amount of electricity that can come into your house as the electricity budget for your house, you need a panel that's probably at least 100 amps in size and the electrical service that provides 100 amps of electricity budget, as it were. And it says down there, defend the panel. What that basically means is that, again, you guys have this Electrify Everything program where the contractor is going to try and do multiple projects within a single house, right? So in general, when a contractor comes to your house, maybe they just want to install your furnace, or they just want to install your EV charger or whatever, and they don't care about whether you electrify everything in your house. And so it's this idea of trying to choose appliances that maybe use less of your electricity budget or that fit on your physical panel, so that you can make everything work. And again, going to this next slide, this might be a little intimidating because it gets into like what's on your electrical panel, but this image comes from this guide from Redwood Energy, and it tries to lay out like, hey, this might be your 100 amp panel, and here's how you could add all of your appliances to that panel, and make it all fit. And they do that with some, they're not quite tricks, but there are 240 volt circuits sharing devices, which is sort of like a power strip for an appliance outlet. Excuse me. That would let you potentially, share a spot on your electrical panel between your stove and your EV, because you don't necessarily need to charge your EV for the 20 minutes that you're cooking, and you don't need to, and it will just charge your car the rest of the time and save space on the panel. Similarly, if you get a heat pump, which I'll talk about in a second, the air handling unit can be on the same circuit on your panel. So these are just ways of economizing. So you don't necessarily have to upgrade right away. You might want to upgrade, or you might need to upgrade anyway. But again, these are ways to try and avoid that for as long as possible. And again, when I talk about a puzzle, this is part of the puzzle. It's like, how am I going to fit all these things onto the panel? And then there are also these there's a bunch of different brands. I just put one here called Span, which is it's a computerized electrical panel. So people might be familiar with Nest thermostats, where some guys from Apple decided to take smartphone technology and apply it to a dumb thermostat to make it smart and internet connected. These companies are doing the same kind of thing for the electrical panel, and then it can control the loads with the computer, so it becomes easier to manage all of your devices and not worry so much about your electricity budget. The computer handles some of that. All right, so now the third thing in the book, and this is probably the hardest thing that most people will have to do, is getting a heat pump. And a heat pump is basically there are two ways to think about it. One is like an air conditioner that can run in reverse, or your refrigerator is a heat pump, where it pumps the heat out of your refrigerator, and that's what makes it cool. Similarly, when an air conditioner works, it pumps heat out of your room, and that's what makes it cool. And it's like your room is the inside of the fridge. But a heat pump has a reversing valve that will let you pump heat into your room instead of out. And so it does double duty, both heating and cooling. And there are window units, just like traditional packaged, they call them window units for air conditioners, but that can also heat your room. And then you can also get them installed. So over here on the right is what's called a mini split heat pump. And so there's a unit that is inside your house, and there's a unit outside your house, and it can extract heat, quote unquote heat, out of even very cold air and pump it into your house. And it makes the outside a little bit colder, not noticeable, like particularly I'm sure in Maine winters. It makes your room warmer. And the thing about heat pumps is they're pretty magical devices. Magical in as much as, let's say you have a natural gas furnace, and for every unit of natural gas you put in, 80% of that gets turned into heat in your room. And so it's 80% efficient. That's okay. I mean, they're better furnaces, but at max, you're going to get 100% of the energy from the natural gas into heat in your house. With an electric resistance heater, like baseboard heating or little space heaters, 1 unit of electricity input gets turned into 1 unit of heat output. And so those are very efficient. They turn all of the energy into heat. But a heat pump can take 1 unit of electricity, and it can pump 3 units of heat from outside into your house, and you can get 4 units of heat of warming in your house for 1 unit of electricity. So it's 4 times more efficient, or 4 times better using energy than an electric resistance heater. And some of the best in the world can be up to like 700% efficient. So let's say you're replacing an electric baseboard or a space heater with a heat pump. Your electricity bill should go down 4 times, 4x, because you're using a quarter of the electricity to do the same job. And there's been a big push to, so this is sort of the heart of Rewiring America's mission, is to get people installing heat pumps. And anyway, so the first thing you should do before you get a heat pump, ideally, is you get an energy audit on your house and you seal up the leaks. So basically, they'll put a big fan in your door and they'll measure whether there's air leaking out of your house, and they can seal those up. And the goal is to reduce the amount of heating that you need to make your house warm. And if you get an energy audit, that can be immediately beneficial to your house. If there are other people who have similar kinds of houses, you don't necessarily need to do an audit, but that depends on your neighborhood. And then I just wanted to share this thing down here. Montgomery County in Maryland has a program where they have these little infrared cameras that plug into cell phones, and they have a program where their library their library lends these little infrared cameras out, so you can do DIY home improvement projects like weather stripping and things like that. So that's just another idea that I ran across, that I'm just sharing these sort of little ideas as best I can to try and get people moving forward on this stuff. So you get an energy audit, you seal up your house, that's immediately beneficial to you. And then the next thing to do is you find a contractor who is willing to install a heat pump. And it says inverter driven heat pump. That basically means that it can run at lots of different speeds. And that's really the better type of heat pump, as opposed to just an on-off heat pump. And you guys, again, have a contractor who is going to do this work through the city, through the Electrify Everything program, which is great. But if in the future you need to also go try and find other contractors who are willing to do heat pump installs, you can ask them these 3 questions. Are you going to do a manual J? A manual J is essentially a calculation for sizing the heat pump appropriately for your house based on your number of windows and how much sun it gets and where the trees are, etc. You can ask them if they're going to have room by room airflow and what types of inverter heating systems they sell. And if they say we don't do heat pumps, you can just call the next one before they ever roll the truck out to your house to investigate. And it might be maybe your contractor on your program is going to find this, but that similar kinds of houses, everyone can kind of settle on one particular heat pump that's good for most houses. And so in Menlo Park, which obviously has a different climate, they've sort of settled for the program they're running on this like Mitsubishi 3-ton inverter driven heat pump. So you get some economy of scale. If it's like, well, that's pretty good for most people, we can buy 10 of them and save some cash without having to do it for everybody. And then the last thing I'll say is towards that idea of being a good client, there are these mini split heat pumps that I was saying before. They sort of have a suitcase size outdoor unit. And then this one over here, the high wall mount unit, is what, if you think at all of heat pumps, you might think of those cassette type thing. No, not cassette. These units that are mounted on the wall. Some people are like, I think they're ugly. I don't like heat pumps. But in fact, manufacturers have come out with other types of heat pumps, like these ones that go up into your ceiling that look like regular heating devices, these low wall ones that look like your radiators. And there are even mini split ducted ones where you put it in one room up in the ceiling and it can power multiple, it can heat and cool multiple rooms at the same time. Or on the other side, there's a central heat pump, which is more like central air conditioning, where you have ducts in the ceiling and a blower that blows air through all of the ducts, and an outdoor unit. And those are in some ways potentially easier to replace than a mini split, because you don't have to install something in every room. And I just want people to be aware that if they come in and they say, oh, here's your high wall unit, you can ask as a good client saying, well, what other options do I have? Okay. So that's again, that's sort of the hardest thing you have to do. And after that, a lot of these other things are sort of replacement appliances. So your heat pump water heater can replace your regular water heater. It's the same idea. It pumps heat from your basement or garage into the water. And it works pretty well. People seem to really like their heat pump water heaters. One benefit is that because the heat pump acts as an air conditioner, essentially pumping heat out of your basement or garage where it's located and into the water, it also helps to dehumidify that space. And so you do need to plan for where the condensation from the moisture in the air is going to go, but you end up, basements tend to be a little damp. garages can be damp, and so you get this beneficial dehumidification. And then for colder climates like you guys have, they're more expensive, but they have these split. It's called split, just like the mini split, where the unit and the tank are separate. The heat pump unit and the tank are separated, and they work pretty well in cold climates. Electric cooking. So when people think of electric cooking, sometimes they think about these coils. Excuse me, these coil burners, right? That maybe your grandparents had, that you might not like that much because it heats up slowly and it's hard to control and it cools down slowly. Those are fine. Those are electric, and we like those well enough. But the sort of better appliances these days are these things called induction stoves. It uses, instead of resistive heating, which again is like 100% efficient max, it uses what's called an electromagnet, which is like it sets up a little magnetic field to transfer energy directly to the pot, and it works very well. It's more like computerized controlled cooking than just making a thing hot and cool. It gives you very precise control. It does not really get very hot on the stove itself. And you can check if your pans will work with induction by just sticking a magnet to it. And if this magnet sticks, then your pan should work. And you can get a $50 or $100 portable 120 volt unit that plugs into a regular wall outlet. IKEA sells them. You can buy them online pretty easily just to test out. And you can, I have one, I'm a renter, and I just put it on top of my gas burners and we cook with that. And it works very well. And so if you have people, I should say, gas cooking is not like a huge part of the amount of energy that you use in your house, but it can be an obstacle to getting rid of, say, natural gas entirely, because people think, oh, I love my gas stove, I'll never give it up. And you can get one of these burners to try out, and then see if you like it. And so they work really well. Okay, clothes dryers. They have ventless ones that are popular in Europe. It basically means you don't need a hole in your wall to exhaust the hot, moist air, and instead it just condenses down the water into either a drain or a little container in the dryer. But it's still better to hang dry your clothes. That uses the least energy. EVs, people are getting pretty familiar with EVs now. One thing I didn't know when I started doing this research is that your EV comes with a cable that can plug into a regular 120 volt wall outlet and charge around 40 miles overnight. So if most of your driving is around town, you don't have to worry about fast charging, or you can go online, and this again is in the guide, and identify places around town where there are charging stations. And if you want, you can like plan a road trip that maybe you take or want to take, and figure out where the charging stations are there. And then if you do decide that 40 miles a night is not enough range, you can get an EV charger. They're called EVSEs. It's a weird technical name, but with those, they plug into a 240 volt outlet, and they can do 200 miles a night. And there are indoor and outdoor versions. There's portable versions, etc. I didn't know this either. When you're planning your electrical panel puzzle, you can get a charger, a level 2 charger, they're also called, that has an adjustable setting so that it can be between, say, 20 amps and 50 amps, so that it can take up less space on your panel. And you can try charging with the lower amps. It'll get you more than the 40 miles a night, but it might not get you 200, but that might be fine. And so that's just another way to think about the puzzle of your panel. And then the last two are rooftop solar. Again, this become more mainstream, and we're not killing it as the United States. There's other countries that are doing better, like Australia, but it's becoming more common for people to get solar panels, and not just to be on the forefront, just as a mainstream thing that it makes sense. I mean, somebody said that you have net energy metering, so you can get paid for your rooftop solar if it flows back to the grid. But you can really quickly go online and type in your address, and Energy Sage will give you an estimate of how much solar potential your house has. And you can also get quotes from installers. And you should also include batteries as in the quote, at least, so that you know what you're dealing with, because solar panels won't work in a grid outage. They have to shut off so that the people who are working on the grid don't get electrocuted. But if you have a battery, your house can sort of be unto itself and power some of your house from the battery, and the solar panels can recharge the battery during the day. So, and it might be, well, these are things that are in the book. These are just details for helping you, again, be a good client. And then for the battery itself, there's a couple of different variations. There's AC coupled and DC coupled. It's sort of, again, to help you understand what the contractor is proposing. But it might be in the near future, hopefully, you'll be able to use your EV as your backup home battery. That's being pioneered now by Ford with the F-150 Lightning and Sunrun, which is a solar installer, in order to get the car working as a backup battery. So that's coming. But it depends on your budget and your timeline for getting these things done. So, all right, that's all I want to say. I'm happy to answer questions. The short of it is, it's great that you guys have a program for helping people to electrify their house. You need a plan. You can work together. It can help get things done. You're already working on that. And I just want to point out the thing I'm working on next is trying to electrify schools. So if your house is already electrified, you can start working on your local public schools and figuring out what their plan is for getting gas and fuel oil and stuff like that out of the school. Okay.
Wow, that was really great. Lots of awesome information, and our chat was blowing up. Lots of really great conversation happening in the chat and some great questions. So we'll try to make sure we get answers to all those things as we go through the next 25 minutes or so that we have left. And looks like we have a hand up from Alan. Alan, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Right. So I have three brief little things. One is, you mentioned for people waiting to change out their appliances. And I think it's important for people to also understand that the sum total of emissions that go into the atmosphere over the next 20 years do actually matter to the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. So we really should not encourage people to just hold on to their stuff until it fails. If we can get them to move any faster, it makes a better result. The second thing is, you mentioned being able to buy actual real solar RECs in the market. And I've had a trouble doing that. One comes across really cheap compliance RECs that are volunteer RECs, which really aren't equivalent to actual real solar power. And if we had a market for actually selling real RECs, this would really be a help. And I don't know how we can do that, but we should open the conversation. And the final question is, do you know about hydronic heat pumps? That is, heat pumps that plumb into a water circulating heat system.
Yeah, so I'll address all of these. The first is absolutely, if you can afford to go faster and can get your whole house done as soon as possible, that's better for the planet. It's better for your health in your house because you won't have fossil fuels in it anymore. Troy had asked me to talk about Rewiring America, and part of the difficulty of America is we haven't really fully been taking this climate change problem seriously, and we haven't really been paying attention, which is why we have all these fossil fuel appliances in everybody's houses, and it's like, oh no, in order to get to zero, we have to get rid of all of them, because even if they're 100% efficient, you're still burning fossil fuel. So our approach has been, yes, you need to replace all your appliances. You should do it when they burn out or sooner. But from a messaging point of view, the American public isn't ready to hear that you need to spend all of this money instantly to replace stuff that's still working. And so our message is softer to do it, make a plan so that you don't accidentally default into replacing it with another one that's going to be around for a long time. But yes, absolutely. If you have the means to do all of this quickly, definitely do it. We recommend going faster if you can, but it's, again, we're trying to make people not regret not planning and getting another one. As far as RECs go, I really have no idea. I just heard that earlier on the conversation. I don't know of anywhere really that sells RECs into the home market. They tend to be compliance based, and so they're traded for industry mostly, where they need to. It's a combination of the renewable portfolio standard and the compliance issues around mostly them who need the RECs. And so in the book, we do talk a little bit about RECs in terms of rooftop solar and whether you should sell your RECs, but it's an interesting idea. I don't know what would have to happen if for Maine or for your grid to have RECs. And then finally, hydronic heating. It's something that I did not put in the book and I should have, but there is in that buyer's guide, not the buyer's guide, in the it's gonna be hard for me to go back on my slides. Oh, here, if I get out of full screen, I think I can see it. But if you go to Redwood Energy, I think .com, in that book that I recommended, where did it go? It's not working. Oh, here we go. If you go back to this guide has some hydronic heating systems that you can look up. And it's essentially a heat pump, but it's like a heat pump water heater for heating water that will then heat your house. So it's an air to water heat pump, and they exist. They're less popular here in the United States than they are in Europe, but that's because fewer people use forced water, but they do exist, and they've gotten pretty good as well. Other questions? I have not been monitoring the chat.
I wondered if you could unshare your screen just so we could make this
sure,
more
of course. Sorry. Yes, sorry. Hey, everybody.
And also welcome. When Julie wasn't able to join us at the beginning, so we want to welcome Julie Rosenberg from South Portland, and want to hand it over to Julie just for a moment to talk about some plans that that her office has for electrification too.
Thanks, Troy. And I just want to, Joel, thank you so much for doing this. And we downloaded your report and have it on our conference table. And it's a great resource. And the other two resources I think are fantastic for people are Efficiency Maine's website, very clear, good information, also has a lot of vetted installers that you can look up, and the way that they have looking up who can install this is you can search by heat pumps or solar, and they'll categorize them for you. And then also I sent in the chat, Maine Office of Public Advocate has some great community solar webpage where they also have vetted solar developers and questions to ask them to go on. I just wanted to share for a minute, Portland has rolled out a fantastic Electrify Everything program, and their webpage has so much information on it. And I think Troy sent it in the chat. So definitely go to that. And I just wanted to share a preview of what we are proposing in South Portland. Same concept. We want everybody to replace their fossil fueled based equipment with electric. Again, before it dies, because it's, I mean, especially for the water heaters, people rarely think of that until they have to replace it. But same principles that we want to do. Our program's a little bit different. We have submitted a proposal to get ARPA funding from the city of South Portland. And our Electrify Everything program is going to be, you can choose any Efficiency Maine vendor you want, and we will put a rebate on top of the Efficiency Maine rebate to bring the capital cost down of installing these pieces of equipment. So I'm hoping that that's going through. It looks pretty good. And if the funding gets approved, we will hopefully roll our program out this summer. If you are a South Portland resident and you like this idea, feel free to, let people know that.
Great. Thanks, Julia. That's great. I think that's going to be an excellent program. I love how you're hoping to be able to harness that ARPA funding to provide additional financial incentives for people to do this work. It's going to be really helpful for folks, for sure.
Oh, I forgot one key piece. What we're starting with, we're starting with a big chunk of money. What we're starting with is we really want to help low to moderate income people in South Portland. So it's qualified at 80% of area median income, which is which is not low income. It's solidly low and moderate income. So
Great. Thanks, Julia. So do we have any more questions on, I don't see any hands up, but there's definitely some in the chat. So there was one question about the, I'm not sure anyone knows the answer to it. Maybe Tom Tudor from Revision, about the load shifting. I know, if someone's going to do a ton of electrification, they could, as Joel mentioned, bump up against their breaker box capacities. Are we allowed to do the load sharing with a device like that, Tom? Do you know?
I don't know, Troy. I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but
sure. Well, that's good. Yeah,
I can add to that. This is
okay. Go ahead.
Michael. I asked that question. So
yeah, great, Mike.
the load sharing on a circuit where there's the devices where you could like essentially switch between like your dryer or charging your EV.
Right.
That being on one circuit. I've heard anecdotally that in some places that's against the electrical code, so you can't do that. I don't know how true that is or if that's true here or not. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's a great one. I will talk to our electric officials here in the city, and we can add that to the resource on the One Climate Future page as well.
Yeah, those span panels that Joel had a slide on, those do, as I understand it, are allowed by code and does allow for that sort of dynamic load shifting, which you're exactly right. If you only had 100 amp service and you were trying to fully electrify without load shifting, and you were doing an EV charger and full electrification of your house, you're going to be likely bumping up to that 100 amp service capacity. So the simple answer, like really today, is to upgrade to 200 amp service. But those smart panels are a potential option that I know Revision's been investigating. We don't offer them yet, but it is exciting technology. Also has some exciting facets for battery backup, being able to manage your loads in that sense as well. So great question.
Great, thanks. And I know Julia had a comment you wanted to make. Do you want to hop on, Julia?
Yeah, thanks, Troy. I just wanted to say that I did all the things that Joel talked about, and so I'm really glad to see him make all those points, because I weatherized the house, I electrified it, I solarized it. It's all done. And the point I want to make is that it's cheaper to operate my house now with the investment that I made in the building, and most people find this, than it was before. So I'm a realtor, so I deal with a lot of people on building issues. And so I encourage everybody to get an energy audit. They'll tell you where your air leakage is, where your insulation is weak, and what to do about it. And step by step by step, you don't have to do it all right away like we did, but they'll help you. And so you're investing in your building, and not in your operating costs that are going out the window and right now literally going through the roof. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Julia. I know we had some discussion in the chat about different solar options. And so obviously we can do solar panels on your roof, but not everybody is able to do that or wants to do that. So there's the subscription model. And actually, if you don't mind, Tom, I'm going to pass it over to Tom, who's our Revision Energy Electrify Everything partner. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the differences between subscription solar and ownership model solar farms.
Yeah, it's a great point, Troy. I think there's a lot of, sort of confusion out there. Everybody in Maine has been getting these mailers. Those are all different subscription solar farm offerings that are all good and very similar as I understand them. Revision also offers an ownership model, which you can kind of, I think the best analogy is subscription is you're still renting your electricity, you're just renting it for a little bit less because it's from clean energy. So that's great, but it is still tied to increasing electric rates. So you just get a fixed either 10 or 15% discount. If you can either take out a loan or purchase it outright, you can own a portion of a large ground mounted array, and you get the same bill credits on your bill as if you had solar panels on your roof. So it's the same net energy billing. So our employee owned company is really proud of being able to develop that ownership model for Maine.
So it's kind of like having solar panels on your roof, except they're not on your roof. You still get the fixed rate you pay. You're buying your electrical supply basically up front and benefiting from the long-term fixed costs that you're not subject to the whims of increasing costs in the future. You're kind of locked in for that percentage of electricity that you've purchased. Is that right, Thomas?
Yeah, exactly. I really think it makes sense to think about investing in your own solar on your roof or at a community solar farm or your own ground mount as pre-buying your electricity for 25 to 35 plus years. And if you look at the cost for that upfront cost, whether you finance it or pay upfront, divided by all those kilowatt hours that it's going to make for you over that lifespan, your cost per kilowatt hour is like less than half of what CMP is currently charging today. And we expect the long-term trend of about 3% annual increase in electric rates to continue, although we know in January it went up by about 33% for the total kilowatt hour rate.
Yeah, I mean, just from personal experience, I know not everyone is able to do it. I mean, but I was in my home, I was able to do solar panels several years ago, and now I have enough on my roof to run my heat pump to heat the home and also to power my car. So I'm able. It's really fantastic. I can drive around in my EV and keep my house warm, and it cost me $14 a month. So that pre-investment, I'm privileged and was able to do that. So I appreciate it. But if you can, it's really an amazing way to go. Let's see.
I just want to add.
Go ahead.
In the guide, there is a section called "How to Pay for It," which
Yep.
goes through the financing stuff for solar is explained in the solar chapter and a little bit in the purchase renewable energy chapter. But as far as paying for things up front, there are options, including like if you were to refinance, you could roll into your mortgage a lot of this stuff as a part of a green mortgage. You get a second mortgage. There's a number of options so that you could spread the upfront cost out over time. And so just something to consider. All right.
Great point. Yeah.
And not
Julie.
for solar, but for all of the other technologies, you can get an efficiency Maine loan of up to $15,000 with a really good fixed interest rate.
Right. That's right. And then let's say, Ruth, you've had your hand up for a while. Let's go to you next.
Thanks, Troy. I just wanted to inject a little piece of reality into the community solar discussion, or as Tom was saying, the rent solar. There have been so many problems with connecting these various solar projects or farms to the grid via CMP that the projects aren't coming online, quickly at all. My condominium association signed up for one of these projects through Nexamp, which is Boston-based. And that was well over a year ago. I'm thinking it's, closing in on 2 years. And it keeps getting pushed, off one quarter after another quarter. So it's still a great idea. We're still optimistic that this is going to be, part of, our solution to our energy needs, as well as reducing our carbon footprint. But the reality is that, we don't yet have an operating community solar program.
Yeah, I think that you're right. There's definitely a lot of hang-ups with the interconnection process from a lot of projects, and the city of Portland is involved with many of them as well, and we're experiencing the same thing. But there are depending on the vendor, some of them are coming faster than others. So, but it definitely has gummed up a bit for sure. Yeah, Jim, you had your hand up too.
Yeah, thanks, Troy. Good to see you. Good to see a lot of neighbors here. First of all, thanks for the presentation. It's helpful. I've had heat pumps wherever I can for as long as I've been able to, and really like them. So I strongly encourage people to do heat pumps. And like the previous speaker, I too signed up for Nexamp, and I've been waiting over a year for that to happen. But I am worried, and I want to, and what I'm worried about is not, people can talk about whether it's CMP or others who are at fault, but yesterday there was a big article in the Maine Townsman magazine talking about how cities and towns in Maine are placing moratoriums on solar development. I'm helping a bunch of solar developers trying to get projects through, and the Maine legislature passed a moratorium on net energy billing projects under the current rules. And the PUC is taking a very strict view on getting those through. So that's lots and lots of megawatts. The regional electric grid has rules that CMP has to follow that I don't know what the solution is. So I guess my worry is when I turn on my switch, I'm getting electricity from all of New England, even if I sign up for a solar developer, and I want to do that. So I've kind of come to the philosophy of all of the above. That we should be doing everything we can do everywhere we can do it in order to reduce our climate impacts. And I guess, and I would say that electrification is a good goal, but I think some of the chat conversation showed that our grid is not yet 100% renewable. It's a goal. We want to get there. It's going to take decades. We got to do everything we can. But there are also some natural gas options where there's renewable natural gas being created that avoids methane coming from anaerobic digesters and things like that. So I guess I would just caution us to think big when we think about how we can improve the environment.
Good point, Jim.
Yep. Oh, Jim, Alan, I know you've had your hand up. May I just respond to Jim for a minute?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Because he's my neighbor. Jim, I appreciate everything you said. I really do. I think I don't know, you know, for like 8 years, we tried getting good solar policy and the momentum was building up. And then all of a sudden the legislature passed this fantastic solar policy. So there's just a glut of everything and everyone having to figure it out. So, but I think they are, and I even think CMP is actually working to figure all of this out and get it evened out and more steady. I just want to say, Jim, I love everything you say. Your insight is fantastic. All I'm going to say is that for at least a decade, if not more, we said, hey, natural gas is cleaner burning. Let's use it as a transition fuel. But that moment has passed because we're not investing in that infrastructure. And it is a lot of infrastructure to use it as a transition fuel until we can get to a cleaner grid. Because then it's just going to be abandoned infrastructure, and people are going to fight to not have that happen. So where you can take an oil boiler out in a second, having all of the natural gas stuff there, so I'm going to push back and caution against even the renewable gas, figuring it until we can figure out how to make it really, really viable as a sort of gateway.
Fair enough, if I may. I was where you were, Julie, when I first learned about it. I would say that I've learned a lot since then that causes me to think differently, and I'll just leave it at that.
Oh, maybe we should have a coffee and climate dedicated to renewable. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. So we're running low on time. We have time for maybe one or two more questions. And Alan, you've had your hand up for a long time, so.
Okay, so I want to ask Tom whether it would be possible for Revision to make available some kind of solar ownership plan that included the RECs. In other words, it did not sell them, that cost more than the other ones, but for people who actually want to know that they really are getting solar power, if they could just not sell their RECs, that would be very helpful.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, I think maybe that's a whole coffee and climate there on RECs, because it is an interesting one. when you said actually using solar power, I do feel like you need to push back on that a little bit, because, you know, owning a solar farm share, you are producing clean electricity with your panels that you own, sending those clean kilowatt hours into the grid. And as soon as they go through CMP's meter, you get those kilowatt hour credits on your bill. That's the electrons. Then there's the extra RECs, sort of the carbon credit piece, which you're right, revisions, ownership model solar farms, and the subscription model solar farms sell those RECs. Those RECs go in subscription farms, they go to the investor, who also gets the tax credit for those subscription farms. With our ownership model farms, those RECs are sold to try to cover as much of the lease and liability insurance and maintenance costs for the farm as possible. And we don't have an offering that does not sell those RECs. But I appreciate the question. And yeah, I don't think that's you know, unheard of that we couldn't offer that in the future. It is really tough to do that in the single farm, have some people selling RECs and some people not selling RECs. So I appreciate the commitment to doing all of that, you know, as environmentally friendly as possible. I always come back to the fact that we need to get as much clean energy built as quickly as possible, and the REC market is one way to accelerate that, in my opinion. So that's why I'm supportive of it.
Great, thanks. So yeah, there's so many, you know, once you start talking about electrification and energy policy and renewables, it gets really complicated. There's lots of factors to think about. So some good suggestions for future conversations about renewable gas, whatever, you know, REC 101, or, you know, there's lots of things we can talk about. But unfortunately today we are running out of time, but this was tremendous. I love the great conversations going on in the chat. That was fantastic. So again, thanks, Joel, for waking up really early on the West Coast and joining us.
No
and
problem.
Thanks everybody for this fantastic conversation this morning. And we'll maybe hopefully see you again next month when we have another one. And we'll post the resources that were mentioned on oneclimatefuture.org. So you can look them up and look at the books, look at Joel's book, look at the other resources you mentioned, and we'll go from there. So I hope everyone has a great day. Do you have one last comment, Joel?
Well, I'll do two comments. I'll send the slides so that people have the links and stuff. And a lot of you guys are already tuned in. Just get going. Somebody had to think about, like, what about greening the grid? Don't worry, the grid will catch up. Do not use that as an excuse to not move forward on electrification. Right. So get going. We can do it. We have a solution. Right. We just need everyone to implement it.
Super. All right, everyone.
All right.
On that note, thanks. We'll see you next time.
Have a good day. Thanks, guys.